Okay, so this morning we're going to have an update on our vulnerability assessment from Ashka Patel. We had our first update that went to council on Thursday, and it was well received. So she has taken that PowerPoint and added some additional information to it for the RSAC committee. So Ashka, it's all yours.
Okay, you can still hear me?
Yes. Yes.
All right, great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Thank you for taking some time to hear our update. Just a quick recap first of the main elements of this project, which we had shared.
How's that?
Yes, sorry.
Sorry. And you want to approve the minutes? And then
Sorry, Ashka.
Just we have some business to do.
Sorry, 1 second. Yeah.
1 second, we kind of jumped the gun.
Is there a motion?
No worries, no worries. I'll mute myself.
Move to approve.
And the ones that
Yeah,
Kyle edited.
You had some edits?
Yeah, I had edits.
Okay. Second,
Sure.
thank you. All in favor?
Aye.
Thank you. Now, go.
Go ahead, sorry.
That was it.
Yeah, you're good.
Okay, all right. So first a quick recap of the main elements of the project, which we had shared with you. I think that's
Yeah, I'm
6
trying to
months ago.
figure out.
Hold on, Ashka. We're trying to figure out the volume on our end. It's kind of low. We can't hear you very
Oh,
well.
okay.
Hear you, but not.
All right, go back to your remote that you did before.
And take it all the way.
It wasn't helping.
No, it wasn't.
I turned it up to.
Keep it going, keep it going.
I don't think this is connected to this. I'm sorry, can you say something?
How is this? Is it better?
That's the
Right.
same. Let me.
No,
it
it's
might
not
be on
better.
this.
Hold on.
There it is.
Sorry, say something.
There it is.
How is this?
Ah.
Thanks.
Hey.
Thank
System
you,
is so-
Ashka.
The system is so complicated. Okay, sorry.
Yeah,
Go
yeah,
ahead,
okay.
Ashley, now.
All right, we're good, right?
Yes. Thank you.
Okay. Oh yeah, no worries. So yeah, like I was saying, just as a quick recap, because it has been quite a few months since we first shared about this project and our plan for it. So the main element, or 2/3 of this project, is focused on a multi-threat vulnerability assessment that we're conducting for community assets countywide. This is many of the threats that we are evaluating have a deep spatial focus. And then within this assessment, one of our key goals is to create information, develop it with you all and the county staff work group and others in a way that it is actionable. So about 1/3 of this project towards the end is going to focus then on moving from that assessment to some preliminary strategies and actions that are effective, not just effective, but also equitable. And within those strategies and actions, we're focused on taking a whole of government approach. That is why we have a large staff work group from, I think, 8 different departments, 6 or so departments. And with both the vulnerability assessment and the preliminary strategies development, we are following this systematic framework that you see on the right here that goes from understanding the main challenges, assessing vulnerabilities, to taking action. The bottom here is just a reminder of the wide group of stakeholders that we are working closely with, certainly being advised by this committee. We are, some of the updates today I have is from our work with the staff work group last week. And then one, I think, another perhaps significant update since we last met is we now are planning, or we are about to finish planning for how we involve a small group of community leaders in the project. I have some more information about that. So with that, we are currently in the vulnerability assessment phase, and it will go on till I think February, since that really is the main focus of this project. And so on the agenda, I have a little more information about our assessment approach, what is the sort of scope, how we are trying to build information that is actionable. Wanted to share just briefly some things that we worked on with the staff work group last Wednesday. and then talk about our plan for community engagement and where we are today with that. So in terms of the vulnerability assessment that we are creating, there are 3 threats that we are analyzing in depth in this assessment and analyzing them spatially. The threats of flooding and wildfire, we are evaluating those threats at the property level. So these are property-based assessments. And the idea there is to evaluate and understand vulnerability and risk to the built environment in the county and the services and functions that it provides. There's also a piece of roads and connectivity analysis, some of which we started sharing with the staff, but that's sort of outside of the property-based assessments. It's looking at the road network. On the other hand, our extreme heat assessment, the 3rd threat that we are evaluating in depth, it takes more of a sort of higher scale approach in terms of the spatial scale, where we're combining elements of or the concepts of urban heat island and public health into creating this neighborhood scale, or I think census block group scale analysis of how extreme heat vulnerability varies across the county. Today's presentation, I'm mostly focusing on flooding. That was our focus with the county council presentation that Karen mentioned, and also the work that we did with the staff last week as well. So for the property-based assessments, we are using the concepts of vulnerability and risk, and you see the different components of vulnerability and risk on the graphic here. We're using those concepts and applying a consistent analytical framework to them, or implementing through that analytical framework. And the way it is designed is there is coherent approach among the different types of flooding, but also between flooding and wildfire threats. Just give you an example of the type of information then that we are considering to apply this framework is for flooding. This is an example for flooding. When we look at flooding vulnerability at the property level, what we are arriving at ultimately is a designation or categorization of for each property or for each asset, high, medium, and low characteristics of, or high, medium, and low levels of combined vulnerability and risk. But underneath that information, or behind that information, is this individual look at the assessment factors that are on the left here. For example, we are taking into account the location of the parcel, but also the building's footprint within the flood extents. We are looking at how different the property use type and its criticality or criticality of impact. And that gives us a sense of the sensitivity. And then as a sort of proxy for finished floor or first floor elevations, we are looking at effective year build and floodplain regulations that were in place within jurisdictions within the county when a property was built. That gives us a sense of if the property was in the floodplain, what elevation and other requirements may give it a level of coping capacity in when the property experiences flooding. Other threat-related factors are depth of flooding when it is available, likelihood of flooding when it is available. And so with that analytical framework, like I mentioned, we're looking at countywide, community-wide assets, and we have using the sort of parcel data and some other information. This is how we've categorized the assets in the county. So certainly infrastructure, critical services, other government-owned properties, which includes not just the counties, but also municipal, state, and federal properties, as well as utility properties. Then we are looking at homes and businesses. Those are separate categories. We've separated industrial from commercial properties. And then we have a category for sort of what are important assets for the community, not necessarily what we'd consider critical in an emergency situation. So these are assets that promote well-being and cohesiveness in the community. And then we also have a category for open space that evaluates exposure of protected or managed lands in the county, agricultural properties, and importantly, all the vacant properties. So these are properties that are identified as vacant or undeveloped by the county's Department of Revenue, at least for tax purposes. Then moving into some of the first few months after we last met really were focused on gathering and evaluating the type of flood data that was available for the county. One of our key objectives is to use the best available data. We spent quite a bit of time in looking at that. So I have the data sets on the next slide, but really some key takeaways as we spent a couple of months doing that is there's better flood data available now than what has been available in the past from federal sources, like publicly available data. And I'll share the specifics of that in a minute. As we looked at that data and dug into it, what we find is we have multiple sources of data that are modeling similar mechanisms of flooding, different types of flooding. And they because of modeling assumptions, end up showing varying extents, even for when we are talking about similar recurrence intervals, similar frequency or level of flooding. So that I think gives us a sort of broader view of flooding, but also some considerations that we've sort of started working with the staff. And some of our main discussions, and I think perhaps the most nuanced, important ones are going to be as we've gathered this new data and put it into use in the vulnerability assessment, then different types of flooding data sets are going to be perhaps more or less relevant for different types of decisions and different types of actions. And this is something that I think will be part of our conversations in the early next year as well. So with that, flooding assessments, these are the 4 data sources, and sort of collectively, we are assessing 8 different what I'll call flooding conditions. Certainly, the National Flood Hazard Layer, the part of it is the regulatory floodplain, provides this modeled extent of storm surge and riverine flooding. I think everyone here is familiar with those, and they just provide the current conditions. That's since it is a regulatory floodplain, it's an important data set to consider. And then NOAA high tide flooding is a data set that has been available for a while now from NOAA sea level rise viewer. This high tide flooding is what we colloquially call sunny day flooding, and it's mapping the reach of a 1.87 foot mean high water tide in the last decade. The number of days that has seen this level of tide or higher are about vary from 3 to 14. So there's certainly been years with on the higher end of that number. The new data set that I mentioned, or data sets that I mentioned that really fortuitously have been available just as we got the project started, maybe just a little bit delayed, but are a very extensive flood modeling data set by USGS. It's called Cosmos, and USGS has been under the umbrella of Cosmos providing compound flood modeling data to primarily the West Coast over the last decade. But this year, they released a tranche of data for North Carolina, South Carolina, and Virginia. And so we had been in touch, trying to, with USGS, or have been in touch, trying to understand what the data was, and then made some selections with some staff guidance. So with this data set, very importantly, this is true compound modeling. It's still higher level modeling, but it takes into account the compounding effects of riverine, storm surge, fluvial, and tidal. With the type of recurrence intervals that were available, based on our discussions with staff, we chose the 20-year and the 100-year recurrence interval. And we are also looking at those 2 recurrence intervals, how the flooding extents would change in the future with a 1.6 foot sea level rise. Another interesting data set that has been available through Karen's work with the Tri-County Task Force is from the Woodville Research Center. And this was data that was provided to the county also, I think around about 6 months ago in the summertime. And this data set more limited than USGS, but does look at current and future flooding and but takes into account multiple mechanisms of flooding. They modeled 2 different sea level rise scenarios and for the 100-year recurrence interval, and we decided to use the current and the 2.5-foot sea level rise scenario. The 2.5-foot is the scenario of sea level rise is the planning scenario that the city of Charleston has also adopted. 2 main items, and some of it I think may come through in a couple of maps and discussion or a couple of maps that I have to share today is the pluvial flooding element. So I think it's widely known that FEMA flood maps don't take into account the rainfall runoff flooding or the stormwater flooding that happens during heavy rainfall events. And both USGS and Woodville in their modelings, different modeling approaches, but they do have a pluvial element in the set of models. And so as a result, the 100-year extents that they model shows sort of a broader extent than what the FEMA, the regulatory floodplain 100-year extent shows. I think that really is going to be a key part of our discussions on this project. But just as a summary, with these 4 data sets, what we've modeled is 8 conditions, so 8 different flooding conditions, 2 different sea level rise thresholds. So 1.6 foot is a near-term threshold. Based on the NOAA scenario, you're looking at the 2.5 is the sort of midterm threshold. We have 4 recurrence intervals. The 100-year, we've included the 500-year FEMA as well in the FEMA assessment, in the National Flood Hazard Layer assessment. Then we have the 20-year recurrence interval, which has, I think, created some interesting discussions with the staff so far. We're just scratching the surface of those, though. And then we also have the high tide flooding, which is a much more frequent, or the most frequent interval of flooding. With the pluvial elements represented in USGS and Woodville, we are talking about now all mechanisms of flooding that the county experience is represented in 1 or more of these data sets. And with the 6 asset categories that I mentioned, we are now looking at 48 different asset threat individual assessments. That's a lot of data. A quick visual here is in the spatial assessment, again, we are combining assets, parcel level data with the flooding extents and some localized assumptions to create at the property level views of or categorizations of high, medium, low vulnerability and risk. Then those asset level results, they're certainly available to staff in multiple forms. We also are then able to say what is the scope of the vulnerability for the full county, but then also for just the unincorporated areas of the county, and then also each of the jurisdictions within the county. For planning level, a lot of the information or a lot of discussions we had with the staff, we aggregate this asset level vulnerability to census block group and census tract scales, and like I mentioned, also the scale of jurisdictions. I'll pause for questions at the end since we had a little bit of delayed start, if that is okay. I think, does that work fine?
Fine.
Okay.
Is that good with
Okay.
everybody?
Okay, just a quick preview of, or not even a preview, to give you a little bit of a sense of what we did with the staff last week. The objective of that workshop, like I mentioned, we were producing a lot of data, and then the task in our collaborative approach is to make meaning out of it and to turn it into insights that help paint or help point to a direction of where strategies and actions need to go. And so with that, our key objective with doing the hands-on workshop last week was for the staff work group to become familiar with all the different types of information that is available through the assessment, so that when we meet next, the staff is able to sort of come up with questions that they want to get answers to through the assessment information. Also, we had 3 sort of stations that dug into different elements of vulnerabilities, so 3 different themes of vulnerabilities, and we also then worked with the staff or had discussions with the staff about what that means in terms of the use of that information for their planning, strategic decisions, and sort of getting into the elements of sort of so what that this vulnerability exists. And so with those goals, one sort of station that we had in the room was around this 20-year recurrence interval. This is a sort of new, this higher frequency recurrence interval is a new interval to have. And so we, this map just illustrates, in orange here is the Cosmos 20-year flooding extent, and then darker blue areas are floodway or wave action areas, or the 100-year floodplain, and the lighter blue areas are 500-year floodplain. So you can sort of see how much of the 100-year floodplain is actually can or is exposed to the much higher frequency or 20-year or 5% annual chance flooding in there. And then there are differences as well. And so with the staff, we discussed sort of the utility of this higher frequency return interval. And I think mainly what we heard was for stormwater planning. And that's where the staff was interested in digging into this further. Just another view or another sort of preliminary insight that we got from the assessment is that when you think about just the residential vulnerability, certainly vulnerability to the 20-year recurrence interval increases from current to future conditions with sea level rise. Really, residential vulnerability is there. It almost doubles, the vulnerability doubles between the current and the future extent with just 1.6 foot of sea level rise. And this graphic just illustrates how not only the amount of properties that are vulnerable that increases, which is not captured here, but then when you think about the level or the consequence of flooding, that also is quite a bit higher in the 20 years. So it's a wider extent, and it's a deeper extent, or so deeper flooding. And so darker sort of maroon areas here. In the current 20-year, 8% of the properties that are vulnerable, total properties, not just residential, only 8% may see greater than 3 foot of depth at that property level, versus about quarter, 23% of the properties that are vulnerable to the future 20-year extent would see this highest level of depth. So that's just one illustration of we have the sort of combined vulnerability and risk categories, but then we are also able to break down for the staff individual elements of the analysis, in this case, the risk consequence component of vulnerability and risk, to provide some different types of insights. Another theme we discussed was the county-owned critical services and infrastructure. We had a couple of different maps, but this one is showing vulnerability of just the emergency response facilities or emergency response services. Most of them are county-owned, except we also pulled in hospitals here. So this includes point of distribution, shelters, EMS, and fire stations. And we also discussed in another map vulnerability of sort of non-critical but still important services, which is things like libraries, for example, and other sort of public-facing facilities that the county has. So I think that where with the facilities department, for example, and the EMS department, that allowed us to sort of dig into how this information can be useful for their planning. Just to kind of change into a different type of theme, the third station focused on residential vulnerability and really the spatial patterns of it. And this map here is showing the vulnerability of homes to the 100-year current flooding by Cosmos, as anticipated. Certainly much higher percentage of properties are vulnerable at the coast, but inland areas also see residential vulnerabilities. What we really discussed here with the spatial patterns is the difference between the Cosmos or the USGS 100-year extent and the Woodville 100-year extent. The Woodville extent has a very strong pluvial element. As a result, it shows a lot of pluvial-based flooding in North Charleston and then some also in Mount Pleasant. And that is why you see sort of the difference here between this USGS map and the Woodville map. This is something, the utility again of the Woodville data and sort of comparison across data sets is something that we have begun discussing. Another illustration of what that strong pluvial element means is that in the orange here is percent of highly vulnerable homes across different groupings of jurisdictions, but orange is the Cosmos data set, purple is the Woodville data set, and you can really see that big jump in North Charleston, the third plot from the right, and similar jumps, I think, also for the Mount Pleasant, Isle of Palm, Sullivan jurisdictions, and also I think the Ravenel, Hollywood, Megget areas. But across the board, Woodville 100-year extent does, with that strong pluvial element, does model or does is a broader extent by far compared to the regulatory floodplain or the Cosmos extent. Another thing that we had that we got a lot of good feedback from the staff was we had a station that had the ExcelAdapt platform. This is a web-based decision support tool designed for internal use, for county staff use, that provides all this information in interactive form at multiple scales. And so this platform, a preliminary version of it, was ready. And through that, we were able to sort of walk the staff with sort of how to access different types of information outside of the maps that we have presented. And certainly there will be a training on this tool next year for the county staff as well. That's a very quick sort of summary of some of the things that we discussed with the staff. And I think I can pause for questions here, and I have a couple of slides on the community engagement piece. Maybe I could use a time check as well.
I don't know if anyone can stay a little later, but we're kind of at the halfway point right now.
Yeah, does anybody have any questions for Ashka?
Yeah.
You might have mentioned it, but what is the spatial resolution on these models?
Yeah, it really varies. I'd have to look up to tell you the specifics. But it is a gridded data set with depth information in it. And then I think the spatial resolution of the information is sort of one aspect. And then with USGS, as I understand, they have a nested modeling for different mechanisms of flooding, which I think has its own level of resolution and a sort of own level of assumptions with those. So I have to get back to you on each individual data sets spatial resolution.
Yeah, we can get that to you.
Oh, because I mean, first time I've heard about these models.
Yeah, it's fairly new. Yeah.
And I have to say, we kind of came across, this was, I usually when NOAA puts out a new data set, we just hear about it right away through many different channels. And the USGS data, we kind of really discovered through a different project, a different call with USGS folks, where the intent was not discussing this data set, but they just brought it up, and it just so happened that we had just started the project and we were able to create some space to dig into it in the project before starting the assessment. So yeah, it's really interesting that I think that's been the reaction across many different sort of groups that we've interacted with, that this feels like data set that they've just not yet well advertised. But it came out in January this year, so it's also not been very long either.
You mind going back 2 slides?
Yeah, that chart. What are you, oh, never mind, you've got different labels. I'm answering my own question here, if you don't mind just leaving it there.
I know I breezed through it, so I can pause here for a minute.
Well, yeah, just the printout I had, yeah, something called like Southern Coast, and I was wondering what the Southern
Oh,
Coast is.
right. I think I did yesterday. Did create a slide with the better labels as from what I previously had. So I'll be sure to send this this PDF to Karen. I think this was perhaps the only thing that may have been different from the handout.
McClellan will be surprised by this data.
Yeah, there'll be a couple of areas that'll be surprised. City of North Charleston also.
Are the specific properties identified in your report?
In the written report, we wouldn't do that. I think, as in our work with, over a couple dozen jurisdictions, we really stick to the census block group scale patterns of vulnerability, but then recognizing that the staff can use this information, responsibly to many different ends, and that's where the Excel Adapt tool is how we provide the results to the county staff at the property level. And then really we are evaluating every property in the county within those categories. So then it's also kind of, we don't want to maybe identify privately owned properties in a report, but then it's also would the length of it, I think, would also not work quite well with 150,000 or so properties evaluated.
Well, I always think that, and it might not be part of this report, but if someone's purchasing a resident in the county, they're being advised now to look at the NOAA data and the other data, and if you have newer data, they might want to look at that, which might really have a major impact on residential prices and eventually taxes and everything. I mean, so the vulnerability of this data can be mind-blowing a little bit.
Yeah, and Scott, go ahead.
I just think one of the issues, and I think you pointed out this with this slide, is the pluvial flooding is sort of the wild card in all of this, because we really don't understand rainfall flooding as much as we do riverine and storm surge and that sort of thing. And actually this also goes to climate change, because I appreciate you building in sea level rise into your projections, but also intense rainfall is going to increase with climate change as well. So that's going to drive that upward. And a lot of these places are going to continue to have these interior areas of the county are going to continue to have flooding problems regardless of sea level rise.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And I think that's a thing on the slide that I didn't mention, but the Woodville Research Center, they take one view of like taking in the projections of more intense flooding and using a sort of median value. So they incorporate the slightly higher rainfall within their assumptions. And then USGS, the way they've explained their the Cosmos data set, the way they've explained their modeling approach, they really I mentioned the sort of mechanisms of flooding, but in our discussions with the staff, it really takes into account potential changes, not just in rainfall intensity, but also sort of different atmospheric factors, because they go from those global models down to the county level. And so the key is, though, that where USGS has sort of asked us to go back to them to provide more information is the way they do this modeling. It's not very clear what level of rainfall changes are being seen in their future scenarios. They're there, but we need to go back to USGS to get that estimate of like with the modeling and the downscale data sets they used, what is that increase in rainfall? That's something that we need to get back, go back to them for, but they have promised that information.
Does Excel Adapt allow you to model out adaptation strategies?
Not quite. Where it has been useful in that direction has been that it's sort of like a desktop based sort of exercise, right? So I think once at least someone has sort of baked in some assumptions of like I think for the city of Charleston, it's not quite modeling of the adaptation strategies, but we had heard that one title about that the city of Charleston had put in somewhere in the peninsula that resulted in this sort of area of impact that saw decreased flooding. And we were able to sort of take that from the city staff and say, okay, this reduced vulnerability translates to, 30% of churches on the peninsula, 40% of public housing, and so on, which I don't think is what you are asking about, but that's the level to which this data can be used. And with that, I think it is a sort of off Excel adapt sort of desktop-based exercise.
And then at the beginning of your presentation, you mentioned property-based assessments, but also looking at roads and connectivity. What data sets are you hoping to include with that, or have you already done that analysis?
I have. That's a good question. So we look at we use the open source OpenStreetMap data set for roads. It just has a few attributes and is standardized in a way that really makes it easy to do the connectivity analysis. And then, so with the open source data, what the connectivity analysis gets at is not just what roads are exposed, so that's the first thing, and we evaluate that exposure for each of the 8 flooding conditions that we've assessed separately. But then we use fire stations as a proxy for connectivity and to connectivity or accessibility of emergency services to 2 different properties. And then evaluate where there are pockets or neighborhoods that are isolated, regardless of whether they're exposed or not. So where key roads get cut off using this network GIS analysis. And as a result, a neighborhood or a chunk of area becomes inaccessible or could become inaccessible to emergency services. So that's the different types of data sets or different types of information that we take into account with the connectivity analysis. I'll be sure to bring that along with other comments as well for our next meeting or update here.
There's also road closure data that you can get access to that'll show roads being closed specifically for flooding and for people getting trapped in flooding, kind of classified as incidents and having to be towed out of 4 feet of water. It's really amusing to watch, like 3 people drive into an intersection and then the 4th one, like, I'm gonna make it.
And they're driving a really low car and they just think they can go through and make it. Yes.
Optimism is not always good. So this would be sort of 911 calls based data, or are you?
Consolidated Dispatch has the data set.
I'm sorry, can you say that again? The audio is not super clear for me.
The 911 Center, Charleston County Consolidated Dispatch would have the road closure data.
That is very valuable piece of feedback, and we're Karen.
I'll get you connected. Yes, I'll get it.
Even Public Works.
Maybe they do too. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they do have some of that. We'll get that to you, Ashka.
Yeah, we're just running through the same thing for the long range transportation plan, and they're like, well, instead of modeling out stuff, why don't we just show where it's happening?
Where it's happening. And that's one project we were working on with Waze through FloodMap to actually come up and show that information. Yeah, it's kind of slowed down a little, but we were going to be to pick it back up. So, all right. Does anybody else have any questions as she's getting ready to do the community engagement piece? And I know we have SSG is also giving an update. Does anybody else have any questions? Okay, move forward. No, we're good, Ashka. No other questions.
Yeah, I was just asking if we are really running short, we can maybe cover this next time. But it sounds like I'm good to go. Sorry, the audio is not super clear for me.
I mean, we only have about 20 minutes, so I don't know how long your update is, but
Okay, I can just
I think
read.
it's 2 slides.
Okay.
But maybe the questions and feedback can be through email for this portion. And I think you all have the slides, so I won't go through these guiding principles, but there is through a lot of past work that is social equity and justice based, we have some strong sense of what does meaningful community involvement and resilience planning looks like. It goes beyond sort of these conventional notions of engagement that can serve other purposes, but when we talk about resilience planning and meaningful community involvement, we are really talking about prioritizing frontline communities and then doing collaborative work with them, leaning on their lived experiences and knowledge. The idea that those closest to the problems also are going to bring in strong perspectives on what the actions should be. Given where the county is and where this project is, Karen was able to really make this piece happen. And this slide here lays out just very briefly our approach. So what we decided to focus on is create a bit of a foundation for the county to do broader community involvement after this project has ended, but as the work continues in refining strategies. I want to emphasize a couple of things here, but we are opting, like I said, for deeper engagement rather than broader in this phase of the work, and really creating essential conditions for that broader community involvement to be successful. So we are planning to engage 4 to 6 community leaders with that idea. These community leaders, we are looking for those who come from our embedded within frontline communities in the resilience field. They're defined as underserved or historically marginalized communities and climate impacted communities. These communities tend to face the impacts of climate change first and worst. We are doing sort of through different recommendations from the county staff and elected leaders. We have some leads, and we are in the process of sending out some recruitment emails to a small group of community leaders. With this small group, we are going to use a focus group approach. So there are going to be 4 hands-on workshops where it is all about two-way information sharing and collaborative analysis, sort of building consensus as we go on what are the sort of challenges or the goals, what are the priorities that the group is discussing. This work is led by a group that specializes in doing this type of work with frontline communities. Hopefully you'll get to hear from them in the next update. They're called Community Lattice. Really, again, I touch on it a little bit in the guiding principles, but why we are doing this approach is we want to get early feedback to align the assessment as much as we can with lived experiences from this small group of people, recognizing that there are many different perspectives and many different types of community, frontline communities and their experiences. But this is sort of a start with a smaller group, and this process would give the county and the county staff a view of what types of information and knowledge exchange is key, so illustrate sort of what the broader community involvement goals could or should be after this project. The goal with this group and this focus group approach is to go beyond that awareness information or sort of high level sharing of information to developing shared understanding of vulnerabilities and also discussing goals and priorities, establishing a few shared priorities between this focus group and the county staff. And really what we are looking to do through this close collaboration is create relationships that Karen and county staff can lean on for broader involvement and for longer term collaboration after this phase of the work. So some of the new funding that is coming out from, say, like EPA, for example, requires a partnership between a CBO, community-based organization, one or more, and their local government to apply for this funding. So we're really hoping that through this close hands-on work, there's a key sort of objective of cultivating relationships for things like building or applying for projects together. So I'm going to stop there, and I know that's a lot in those 3 boxes, but would love to answer questions over email as you all have. And here's my email.
Will the hands-on, and the question, Karen, will the hands-on meetings be in those communities themselves?
We're still trying to map that out. Odds are we do want to go to those communities, and chat. That is the high level plan right now, but we have a meeting this afternoon with Community Lattice to work out the whole scope. So that is the goal.
And then the leaders will be sort of spread out from different communities too. So yeah, that will be part of our consideration, as how can we spread the sort of burden of travel and stuff in a way that feels that just encourages people to be able to participate fully.
Great. Yeah, and if y'all have any questions on this particular piece, since we're strapped for time, you can get them to me now, or you can email them to me and I can get with Ashka and Community Lattice, and then we can get you an answer back. Thank you, Ashka.
Thanks, everyone. Appreciate your time, and I'm going to log off.
Have a good day. Thank you so much.
Bye.
All right, so we're gonna switch to sustainability. There's Erica. I don't know how long you can stay on, but if some of you can stay on longer, if not. Then...
Yeah, I'm pretty tightly scheduled this morning. I can stay a couple minutes over, but I can't stay that much longer. I'm sorry.
Okay. That's okay. I guess just run through.
We can fly through. Erica, would you mind sharing the presentation?
Sure, yeah, absolutely.
And honestly, a number of the things that you'll see here that you won't see here because I'm going to skip them. You've seen before, so that's okay. We can pretty much go right into the part of what we want to talk about, which is kind of an update from the CCAP meeting from last month. A little bit about some of the things that we heard just in a couple meetings at the end of last week. It was really nice to meet at least a few of you in person.
All right, can you make it full screen?
Are you not able to see this?
Yeah,
it's not full screen.
You should see how enormous it is on my screen.
Okay.
Just to check, let me try something else. Yeah,
that's good.
That's way better.
Okay, great. It's smaller on mine now. Anyway, carry on. I'll just be taking notes, and good luck. Hopefully you can get in as much as you can.
Yes, we can be really fast.
Okay.
Like I said, many of y'all have seen a lot of these things before, and the few of y'all that I did speak with last week, we also talked a bit about these things. So we can roll into the next one. Yeah, so basically coming out of our last month of meetings, engagement, actions development, and working on how to prioritize the actions that are going to make up a big portion of the plan in the end. We wanted to go over just these top considerations that we're doing. We've seen these in one form before. We've modified them a little bit just in order to start that scoring process. Something that I know I've mentioned to many of y'all at this point is we can have a whole universe of actions to meet the goals. So all of those models that show what our emissions are and how to get there to our interim target, and then ultimately our low carbon target in the future. Each of those has any number of actions that can be taken within a variety of categories. But in order to choose what we can do in the short term, medium term, long term, we have a number of dimensions by which to score those actions. Some of those are going to be very clear. They're going to bubble up to the top very quickly and say, these are things that we can do now. We have urgency, we have capacity, we can go for it. Others, we're going to have to wait, whether that means that there's not necessarily an obvious funding opportunity, we don't have county capacity to deliver it, or it's going to require actions from others who we don't necessarily have influence or control over. So that becomes the game of playing, the game of understanding how to order these actions to achieve the ultimate goal. So just on this first page of prioritization criteria, the first two are first three really here are pretty obvious, I would say. County authority. Is this something that is legally within the county's purview and jurisdiction? Two, staffing and capacity. Departments obviously are not operating with lots of surplus capacity, lots of extra people or extra money. So being able to understand what that burden is today versus what it could be potentially with more funding, more human resources, et cetera. That's one of the calculations to be made there. Number three is highlighted there because really it is our point of entry into all of these actions, which is what is the potential GHG emissions reduction impact. These are scored by how much on that chart that you've now seen quite a few times, how much these affect the overall emissions for the county. So with that being our entry point, that in many cases is going to be how we convince federal agencies or others to fund some of these projects, and then we can think about how we can staff that up, how we can use those resources to deliver a project. 4 and 5 there, I think, are also very critical here. County readiness and community readiness. County readiness, really what we're talking about here is things like political priorities. So these are actions that are taken across the county, things that have been identified by county council, for example, to say like, yes, this is a priority. A good example is affordable housing. Does this have a nexus with any of the affordable housing priorities that have already been identified? In a case where it does, that might say that the urgency is increased and we can move forward more quickly because there are also other projects, other initiatives that are already going. Community readiness, similarly, is a lot of what we're hearing in the community, going to community meetings, getting feedback on the questionnaires and surveys, understanding what are those top priorities for community members. I know just from 48 hours in Charleston County last week that development pressures are such a huge community flashpoint right now, and understanding how can we help address some of those priorities through these projects and policies that are created seems like a really great pathway to explore. So on to the next. Thanks, Erica. The next few have a lot to do with what can we take advantage of that already exists in order to advance the priorities. County policies and programs. What's already been going on? I spoke with a few of you last week about what kinds of initiatives you've already got going on, what kinds of priorities and plans are already in the works. What can we leverage in order to take the next step on a program or policy? Cost is an obvious one. How much is this going to cost? How much will this offset other costs? What's going to change when it comes to the bottom line of implementing a specific action? Existing resources, similar to policies and programs, but are there any resources, funds, staff, expertise already that could be used to implement that action? What potential cross-training opportunities exist so that you wouldn't necessarily have to hire someone brand new to do something that's very similar, but maybe looks a little different in order to execute this program? Funding opportunities, we spoke a lot about this at the last committee meeting. Just the unprecedented level of investment right now in climate action and funding availability. A number of programs are already being taken advantage of across the county and state, particularly with the Inflation Reduction Act, different kinds of funding that maybe came out of emergency COVID funding and are now really focused on infrastructure. And these last two are really the ones that I want to focus on today with y'all, the co-benefits and equity. These are things that we know are absolutely critical to delivering any kind of local government program. what are the knock-on benefits? What are the things that, just because we've come to the table with a greenhouse gas reduction measure doesn't mean that it can't benefit community in another way, or it can't help another program in another way. That co-benefit side of things is something we want to explore with y'all definitely over the next weeks and months, and make sure that that's clearly elaborated in a draft plan. Equity concerns, we want to also make sure that any opportunity that we can take, these actions either address an equity concern, redress a problem, an inequity, or just very clearly make sure that we're accruing benefits directly to vulnerable or marginalized communities. We heard this clearly, loud and clear at the county council meeting on Thursday evening, and really want to talk a little bit more about that today.
May I interrupt for a second?
Please.
Based on what you just said and having watched the video of the meeting, can you go back to the slide again? Back to the previous slide. Maybe in future presentations, you don't have equity as number 11.
Yeah.
You have equity much further up, because by just how you present this in visually, equity doesn't seem as important as some other things. I think you heard how important equity is. So maybe in future presentations, we move equity up from 11 to 5 or something like that.
Heard loud and clear. I could not agree more. So yes. Same goes for the presentation of this slide, in fact, too. And it's one of the things we wanted to talk about. So how these things will get scored is across those dimensions. And one of the things that we're going to have to work out and really start to test a little bit is how to weight each of those categories. So a good example would be, see equity all the way over there on the right, really making sure that that weight is increased here so that a potential equity benefit really does increase the urgency of implementing that action. So that's something we're really going to be working on. That's really our next task, is to figure out what that appropriate weighting is. We've certainly heard a few things now, making sure that equity and co-benefits are much higher. Really understanding that that political priorities and county readiness is really critical here, because without that support, it's going to be a whole lot harder to make some sort of a policy change. So these are things we're hearing right now. We can go on to the next slide to hear about what we talked about in the CCAT meeting. Some of this has already been discussed in the CCAT meeting last month. Certainly concerned that the equity weight is too low just in that initial presentation. So that's a priority for us to work on when calibrating that weight. Here, political will or county readiness really should be a 5. Nothing gets done without county approval. Cost and capacity are closely related. This is a great point, and really understanding that how much something costs is going to influence how much capacity within a department we have to deliver something. If it's a heavy cost, there's a big spending burden, then you might need more capacity, and vice versa. This one here, is it possible to forecast or calculate county readiness? This is something I'd say is an open question. Not really understanding what that future state might be. One of the things that we can do is talk about what's existing now, what kinds of plans are existing or being updated currently, and what that future policy priority set might be. I know the comprehensive plan is under update right now. This is a good example of being able to look out a few years and say, yes, based on what we're updating now, we might have some slightly different priorities or slightly different considerations for our next round of updates. And then this last point here, incentive programs will naturally rank higher in feasibility. Being able to encourage people to make a change rather than trying to regulate a change out of someone, that's pretty straightforward. And I think we've heard that loud and clear, that any kinds of incentive programs should be prioritized in this case. Switch to the next, please. Great. So we are out of time, but I do want to make sure that we do have the opportunity to hear this from you. And I know the other thing that's important to just as a reminder, all of this content is in the RSAC workbook. Everything's in there. I would also encourage y'all to update that live. You have access to it. So if you have written responses to anything, please add those so we can take those in. Sometime over the next week would be great. But if anyone has any thoughts, just top of mind right now, in terms of how we could incorporate locally specific equity priorities into potential actions. We've talked about a few example actions. So I think at this point, everyone's got a pretty decent idea of what the universe of actions could be. Do you have any thoughts about specific equity priorities where we should make sure that that priority sits? And then also, are there other considerations outside of the ones that I just flew through that would be important to y'all for narrowing down criteria?
I think identifying, and probably have talked about this, weatherization in those areas is probably a priority, and demonstrating to people how much money they would save by doing weatherization. The other thing is, and this is related to the presentation on resilience, on flooding, especially in marginal areas, which homes are being flooded and on a repeated basis, and what we possibly can do to alleviate that flooding, if at all possible. And that might go back to even stormwater management. I mean, so all these things are probably connected.
Yeah, I think those are great points, and we've heard that quite a few times too. Like, what are those connections between resilience and sustainability measures, and how can they support each other? I think we got to talk a little bit about that on Friday together, but I think keeping that conversation going. What are these actions that we take now that could alleviate flooding, that could increase our resilience? That feels very important here.
And I would encourage you to lean on the feedback from those communities specifically, instead of us guessing what they need. We just ask them what they need and then provide options.
Yeah, so what we did skip in our presentation here that you can review in the workbook is the many engagement actions that have been taken over the past 2 months now. I think we have more than 300 survey responses at this point as well. So we're looking forward to digging into those and making sure that that's a solid screen for all these actions.
Yeah, Jared, I know you need to go, but Erica, if you have a minute, I can go over slides 4 and 5, the timeline and engagement.
Yep, sure, absolutely.
Okay,
I can
I think
skip.
those are just important.
It's
There you
forward,
go.
right? No, it's back.
Yeah, it's back. It's from the beginning. Okay. Okay.
Thank you.
Also, before I leave, I encourage you to take a look at that workbook again. There are a few more questions or prompts in there that would be helpful to hear from y'all. There are things that we've maybe asked or talked about already in other forums, but if you do have something that you think of, an action that you're already taking, a project that you're already working on, and then again, if there's any specific considerations that just really come to mind when you're doing your work today, it would be really great to be able to document that in the plan.
And I'll reiterate a comment from the last meeting that I put in the workbook. But when it comes to the prioritization scoring, consider using that multi-level evaluation. So putting the effectiveness and the cost up front as like an initial screening, the first tier. And consider using a more discrete scale instead of trying to put everything into some bins that you're currently showing there. I think that will kind of falsely bias a lot of projects that are near kind of the edge of each of those bins, and it'll be hard to anticipate since a lot of the strategies that we're talking about are going to cover a very big scale of impacts and costs.
Appreciate that. Duly noted, and I appreciate the reiteration. Thank you.
Thanks, Jared. I'm just gonna quickly go over 2 slides and then we can switch to administrative stuff we need to do. Yeah, so this is the engagement slide. I'm not gonna go over all these numbers, but we have been actively doing a lot of engagement. And so, you know, this is just kind of what I wanted to show. Sorry, the graph is super small, but we have a questionnaire. I think we have like 320 respondents right now. It's still open. But this question, climate action has many benefits beyond reducing greenhouse gases, which of the following is most important to you? So 33% improving disaster preparedness, safety, and resilience. That's really no surprise. Yeah, I mean, that always scores as the most important, of course, in Charleston, because people can see the flooding. And then the second one that ranks pretty close is improving air and water quality. So I think this kind of gives us an idea as to kind of really what the important things are to at least these people who took the questionnaire. I don't want to say for everyone. Erica, can you go back 1 slide to the timeline slide? Thank you. So I just want to give a little kind of idea about where we are. So Thursday night, as you all know, we gave our first county council briefing. In 3 days, we are planning to end engagement. And when I say end, I mean for input into the plan, we're going to do a lot of engagement once we have a draft plan to see what people think and their input on the actual plan. So those are kind of 2 stages of engagement. We are working on the financial modeling results. So that's going to be kind of, it says mid to late December, or in mid-December, so late December. I think that's almost done. We're planning for a second county council briefing in February that hasn't been scheduled yet, to present the draft plan. And of course, you will all see that. We're not gonna have time to go over the draft plan in a meeting. We're not gonna. So I'm gonna ask you guys to look at it on your own time when I send it out and give all your comments. We can talk about comments in the meeting, but we just won't have time to go line by line. And then our final council briefing will be in March, to have our hopefully vote for approval. So that's kind of our timeline. And I don't know if you have any questions on that. It is pretty quick. Yeah, it's quick. So we're really focusing right now on giving council all the information they need to make an informed decision on the plan. So they'll also be, of course, getting the plan in advance to look at and make sure that they're good with it. If we don't have any questions on that, before we go into the next meeting, so Jen is moving to California, so she will not be on the RSAC anymore. So we will have a replacement higher ed person. We could not, so, you know, because council has to appoint that person, we can't do that until January 30th. So we're planning a meeting early February for our next meeting. And I just wanted the group consensus. I know a lot of us are missing right now, but since these meetings feel a little rushed to me, what would you guys think about doing an hour and a half? Okay.
Yeah, I think that would be a good idea because we're gonna have the majority of the remainder of the, I guess, probably for the next couple of months,
Yeah.
will
and
be updates.
Erica,
for
if
our-
your team
for our
wants to sign off, feel
Especially
free.
since it's a short timeline.
Yeah.
Thank you.
It
We'll have a lot of
is.
business to
Yes.
conduct next couple weeks.
Yeah,
Yes.
thanks. Thanks. I hope you found like the update interesting. And is there any other final comments that I should take back to my team before we go? But we will sign off.
There's
Sounds
one on a slide that you didn't get to.
Sorry,
Which
say that
slide?
again.
Like your 4th to last slide still showing the chart from last meeting.
This is still not correct.
Yeah, but I think it was Amber in the Google Doc had updated it with the correct labels.
Okay.
Yeah, the draft low carbon model scenario.
I see. Okay. All right. We'll make sure that it's updated for any future presentations. But if it's in the workbook, that's your main record.
Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
so.
Thanks all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Does this 9:30 time work well for everyone? Do you want to keep like a 9:30 to, this will be 11.
11.
11
I was gonna go 11,
situation?
11. Yeah.
But
Okay.
As long as it's a Tuesday or Thursday.
Okay, I don't know, so I think we'll try to keep the quarterly, but honestly, like with our March approval and then Karen's, you're looking at the May timeframe. we might have more meetings in that time frame so we can get work done. So I can send out everyone, I mean, we can do a doodle poll, or I'll send out, since we're missing so many people, a list of potential meeting times for the rest of, or for 2024. Look what year we're in. I was like, okay, we're still in 2023. And because it would be nice to just get those on the calendar, but we might have to schedule some special meetings to kind of do this work. So,
Yeah. And how important is it to get a replacement for Jim in like a timely manner? Do we need a quorum for anything in the near future?
we'll have the quorum without that position.
Yeah,
But we
we
have,
will.
Even if like Scott and Adrian.
And then we've got Joe Boykin. He just couldn't be here today. So we are missing a
Diamond.
few, but
We're
they're
missing,
still
yeah.
on. Yeah. Yeah. So we'd have a quorum.
I think it's just this time of year. I think we should have our committee back to full capacity next year.
Yeah, and everybody's got a lot going on, so we appreciate everyone agreeing to an hour and a half. I think it would just be easier
I'm
versus
going to
rushing.
Stop the recording.